The elevator doors hissed open like a warning, spilling pale morning light onto the marble floors of Halston and Ride Global, a glass fortress that loomed above Manhattan like a temple of untouchable power. On the 47th floor, chaos had a new name: panic. Inside a soundproof conference room, the air reeked of tension and expensive cologne. Marshall Creed, the billionaire CEO with salt and steel hair, was pacing in tight circles. His jaw clenched, his Rolex ticking too loudly in the silence. "Tell me you're joking," he snapped at his assistant, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I wish I were, sir," replied Leona Vance, phone still pressed to her ear. "The translator just canceled. Family emergency. No one else is available on such short notice. Not for a $300 million Chinese negotiation." Marshall's hand went to his temple, where a small vein began to pulse visibly. 3 years. 3 years building this deal, and we're going to lose it because no one speaks Mandarin. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, 3 luxury sedans from the Eastern Consortium were already rolling into the underground garage. The clock was not ticking. It was roaring. And then, a voice. Software uninvited. "Sir." "I do." They turned. A woman stood near the doorway, holding a dusting cloth in her gloved hands. Her navy blue maintenance uniform didn't match the Italian leather chairs or million-dollar view. But her voice didn't waver. "I speak fluent Mandarin," she repeated. Everyone stared. Her name was Raina Myles, 28, a black woman, a janitor. And for the past 3 years, she had cleaned this floor with the efficiency of a ghost. Silent, invisible, forgotten, but not deaf, not blind, not stupid. Leona laughed, the awkward, dismissive kind that makes skin crawl. "This isn't the time, Raina." Raina didn't blink. "I studied Mandarin, Cantonese, and Taiwanese linguistics. Columbia University. Graduated top of my class." Marshall's eyes narrowed, scanning her like a contract clause. "And yet you clean windows?" Raina paused. "Some debts aren't financial, sir. Some are maternal." The room held its breath. Leona crossed her arms. "Marshall, be serious. We're talking about foreign investment diplomacy, not a cleaning lady with a side hobby." But something shifted in Marshall's face. Not trust, not yet. Just the fragile recognition of desperation. "Prove it," he said. Raina stepped forward, her sneakers silent against the polished floor. She inhaled deeply, then began to speak. Perfect Mandarin, nuanced, measured, without stutter or accent. When she stopped, the silence was thick enough to lean on. "What did you just say?" Marshall asked, his voice lowered. "I greeted them with honor and expressed our hope for prosperous cooperation. It's a common business introduction in their culture." For the first time, Marshall looked not through her, but at her. Really, at her. 10 minutes, he said finally. "Go change. You walk into that room with me, not as janitor, but as our official interpreter." As she walked away, Leona hissed, "You're risking everything." "No," Marshall muttered, half to himself. "I might be saving it." But Raina heard. Every word. And as the elevator closed behind her, she allowed herself one quiet breath, steady and steel strong. Because what they didn't know was that she hadn't just prepared for this day. She had survived for it. And outside, the glass building reflected back a city that had never once paused to see her. Until now. The women's restroom on the 23rd floor was never meant for transformation scenes. But under flickering fluorescent lights and a faulty mirror, Raina pulled her curls into a sleek bun and changed into a simple black sheath dress borrowed from the receptionist. One size too tight, but ironed. She removed her gloves, washed her hands slowly, deliberately. One breath, then another. As if with every inhale, she peeled away 3 years of being unseen. Back upstairs, the boardroom shimmered with tension. The Chinese delegation had arrived. 5 men in custom-tailored suits stood in silence, their eyes scanning the skyline of Manhattan, speaking softly in Mandarin. Raina stepped inside, her heels clicking with quiet resolve. Every gaze turned, including Marshall's. For a second, just a second, his mouth parted, as if he didn't recognize her. This wasn't the janitor from 7 a.m. This was someone else entirely. "Gentlemen," Marshall began, "allow me to introduce our liaison for today's negotiation. This is Miss Raina Myles, our cultural and linguistic specialist." Not a single word about her real title. Not a hint of where she'd come from. The leader of the delegation, Mr. Liu, stepped forward with a gracious bow, his face unreadable. Raina returned the bow with precise respect, then greeted him in perfect Mandarin, referencing his punctuality, a gesture that made his brows lift ever so slightly. The meeting began, and like a thread pulled through fabric, Raina stitched the room together. Sentence by sentence, word by word. She translated not just language, but meaning. The pauses that mattered, the respectful deflections, the subtle cues that bridged two cultures, with millennia of pride between them. And for 15 minutes, it worked. Until Leona interrupted. "Well," she said with a polished smile, her voice cutting through the air, "perhaps we should tell our guests how extraordinary Miss Myles's career path has been." Raina didn't look up. Her pen didn't stop. Marshall gave Leona a sharp glance. "Not now." But Leona pressed on. "It's just so inspiring, really. From janitor to boardroom translator. Proof that here at Halston and Ryde, anything's possible." Raina froze. The weight of the words settled on her shoulders like chains dipped in acid. In the corner of her eye, she saw Mr. Liu's polite smile falter. His colleagues exchanged quiet looks, not outrage, but confusion. In their culture, professional standing was sacred. To learn that the lead translator had just yesterday been cleaning toilets? Raina cleared her throat. "In our company," she said calmly in Mandarin, "we value potential, regardless of title." But it was too late. The temperature in the room had shifted, subtle, chilling, like a storm cloud that no one could name but everyone could feel. She translated the next 10 minutes perfectly, but something was gone. A thread snapped. The laughter was lighter, the pauses longer. She was no longer an asset. She was curious, an outsider pretending to belong. And in that moment, buried beneath years of practiced dignity, something ancient stirred in her chest, something she'd learned to silence long ago. It whispered of shame, of rage, of every locked door, every forced smile, every time someone saw her skin and decided what she wasn't. She looked at Marshall. He avoided her eyes. She looked at Leona. The smirk was back. And she realized, this was not misfortune. This was design. She had not merely been overlooked. She had been kept invisible. The meeting ended with pleasantries. Mr. Liu gave a courteous nod. "We will consider your proposal carefully," he said in English, diplomacy's favorite lie. When they left, the silence in the room was thick with performance. "Well," Leona said brightly, shuffling papers, "at least it wasn't a total disaster." Raina turned to her, calm, composed. "Mr. Liu said something interesting," she murmured. Leona arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" "He asked why the person speaking the language wasn't leading the negotiation. In his culture, language is power." She let the words hang there. Marshall stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "What did you tell him?" "I told him, we're still learning." But inside, something else had crystallized. This wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was the moment she finally understood. If she wanted power, she'd have to take it. That night, Raina sat on the edge of her bed in her one-bedroom Bronx apartment, lit only by the blue glow of a second-hand laptop. She had opened a folder she hadn't touched in months, one labeled Observations. Inside were dozens of scanned notes, audio clips from security feeds, even screenshots of emails. She hadn't planned it out at first, just noticed things. Saw how Leona smiled when she lied. Heard executives whispering after hours. Tracked patterns no one thought a cleaning lady could understand. What had begun as survival had become something else. Evidence. Some called it paranoia. She called it preparation. She scrolled past a file from 8 months ago, a forwarded email from Leona to a client revealing confidential bid data. Another showed inflated costs on projects led by Black or Latino managers, followed by abrupt cancellations. She remembered wiping Rebecca's desk, watching as she smugly closed her laptop mid-phone call, thinking no one heard her say, "We don't need those kinds of names on executive contracts." The rage inside her wasn't hot. It was cold, focused, weaponized. The next morning, Raina walked into Halston and Ryde in full uniform. Gloves on, hair tied back, cart loaded with cleaner, gloves, rags, the costume she wore so the world would look away. But this time, she moved like a spy in enemy territory. Every turn of her wrist, every button pressed on an elevator panel was measured. When she reached the executive floor, Leona was standing in the hallway, chatting with Mira, the payroll manager. Loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "Well, I guess it's true what they say. You can polish glass all you want, but it doesn't make it crystal." Raina passed them without flinching. Her body kept cleaning. Her mind remembered everything. She cleaned Leona's office last, not because it was dirty, but because it was dangerous. The bottom drawer was still stuck. Raina had known that for years. But if you pressed it a certain way and lifted while turning the key, it always clicked. Inside were 5 manila folders. She photographed each page. Silent. Fast. One showed Leona's direct interference in a recruitment process. Emails flagging resumes with ethnic-sounding names for automatic rejection. Another contained a client's complaint that had mysteriously vanished from records. A Black-owned vendor whose contract had been cancelled without cause. The final folder held bonus approval forms, including one Leona had filed for herself, claiming credit for a project Raina had overheard, belonged entirely to a junior team member who was later fired. She closed the drawer. And for the first time in 3 years, Raina didn't feel invisible. She felt dangerous. That afternoon, as the executives gathered for a post-mortem on the Chinese deal, Marshall sat at the head of the table, clearly distracted. The mood was icy. Everyone sensed the fallout. Mr. Liu's team had gone radio silent. Raina entered unannounced, wearing the same borrowed black dress, now carefully ironed and properly hers. Leona's smile froze. "Excuse me, this is a closed—" "Mr. Liu called me last night," Raina said calmly. That silenced the room. "He asked to meet. Tomorrow. Privately. He said he had questions about our cultural hierarchy, and about who actually held the authority in our negotiations." Marshall looked up sharply. "He reached out to you?" "Yes." What does he want?" Raina met his gaze, steady. "To understand what kind of company we are, and whether we value talent or image." No one spoke. Leona's voice cut the silence. "She's twisting this, playing the victim. Don't forget, she's just the janitor." Raina didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out a slim black folder, and placed it on the table. "I've documented every irregularity in this department for the last 2 years, she said quietly. Emails, call logs, expense reports, hiring discrimination, client sabotage, and names of who did what, when, and why. Marshall's expression shifted. Leona turned pale. "I didn't bring this to threaten you," Raina added, her voice soft but cutting. "I brought it because Mr. Liu said something I'll never forget. Language is not just translation. It is power. And whoever holds it, leads." She stood up, calm as glass. "I've spoken your language for 3 years, cleaned your floors, listened to your lies. Now I'm ready to speak mine." As she walked out of the room, silence followed her like a shadow. But this time, it didn't swallow her. It bowed. The next morning, the rain fell soft over Manhattan, tapping against the windows of Mandarin Cove Cafe like hesitant fingers. Inside, a quiet corner table was occupied by 2 figures, Mr. Liu, serene in his charcoal suit, and beside him, a woman in pearl gray silk, her posture graceful, her eyes razor-sharp. "Miss Myles," she said with a calm nod, extending her hand. "I'm Lena Zhou, Vice President of Strategic Development." Raina shook it with steady confidence. She'd barely slept, her heart had thudded until dawn. But here, beneath warm lighting and cinnamon air, her mind was clear. "We appreciated your composure," Mr. Liu began in Mandarin, "but more importantly, your honesty." Raina lowered her eyes briefly. "It wasn't courage, sir. It was survival." Lena leaned in, her voice lowered. "We're expanding in North America, but too many companies here still operate like clubs, not corporations. We need someone who's walked both hallways, the ones lined with paintings, and the ones lined with bleach." Mr. Liu slid a card across the table. "Raina Myles, Cultural Strategy Consultant, annual salary, $290,000. Her throat tightened. "Why me?" "Because," Lena said softly, "you listened while others shouted. And you never mistook silence for weakness. They weren't offering a job, they were offering position." But before she could speak, Mr. Liu added something else. "There is one condition." Raina's heart stilled. "We believe your former company is in violation of international contract protocols. Bid manipulation, internal bias, potentially federal crimes. We'd like you to help us verify certain documents." Quietly. Her pulse raced, but her voice stayed still. "I understand." They nodded. She rose. And as she stepped back out into the gray light of the city, the drizzle on her face felt like permission. At Halston and Ryde, the storm had already begun. Marshall had just received a formal letter from the Chinese delegation. Concerns of ethical breaches. Within an hour, the Legal and Compliance Board was called for an emergency session. Leona barged into his office without knocking, eyes blazing. "This is all her, that girl. She set this up." "She didn't write your emails," Marshall said coldly. "She didn't reject candidates for their last names. You did that. She was spying on us." "No," he replied. "She was cleaning up after us, and watching." Leona scoffed. "You're going to believe the janitor?" "No," came a calm voice from the door. "You're going to listen to the whistleblower." Raina stepped inside, not quietly this time. In a slate-colored power suit, hair in a bun, briefcase in hand, and not an ounce of hesitation in her stride. Leona rolled her eyes. "This is absurd." Raina didn't address her. She turned to Marshall and laid 3 documents on his desk. Copies of expense reports, communication logs, and the altered bids that Leona filed herself. Marshall scanned them. His jaw clenched. "There's more," Raina said, "including a voicemail from 2 weeks ago where she instructed HR to discard any application that sounded too foreign." Leona lunged forward. "This is an attack. She's trying to destroy me because I told the truth. She's not qualified. She's a janitor." "I was," Raina interrupted quietly. "And while you were perfecting your smear campaigns, I was learning the structure of every contract, every merger, every mistake. I was invisible, but not blind." For a moment the room froze. Then Marshall looked up. "Leave your badge on the desk, Leona." She stared at him, stunned. "You can't." "I can. I just did." Her breath caught. "You'll regret this. She'll burn the whole place down." "No," Raina said softly. "I'll rebuild it. Without the rot." Security appeared behind her. Leona was too stunned to fight back. As she was escorted out, her final look wasn't anger. It was fear. Because for the first time she understood. This wasn't revenge. This was a reckoning. As the sun broke through the clouds outside, Raina walked past rows of glass offices that used to swallow her reflection. Now, they shimmered with her shadow. Invisibility had always been her camouflage. But now, it was her armor. The boardroom on the 46th floor was buzzing, not with words, but with unease. Every senior executive had been summoned without agenda. No coffee, no casual chatter, just silent phone checking and tight lips. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glowed like nothing was wrong. Inside, Halston and Ryde was bracing for impact. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened. Raina entered. No cleaning cart, no gloves, just a laptop bag, high heels, and a silence more commanding than any speech. She walked straight to the head of the table and connected her laptop to the main screen. The first slide read, Cultural sabotage, internal discrimination, and contract corruption. 3 years of evidence. There was a long exhale from Mr. Ward, the CFO. You're accusing the company of— I'm not accusing, Raina said gently. I'm presenting facts. She clicked. Slide after slide unfolded. Time-stamped emails, HR logs, bid documents altered by Leona, hiring filters that auto-rejected ethnic names, spreadsheets, audits, voice memos, surveillance clips. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was a documented timeline of injustice. And why are we only seeing this now? Asked Diane Lim, VP of Operations. Because 3 years ago, Raina answered, I didn't have a voice. I had gloves, a mop, and silence. And in this building, silence doesn't walk into boardrooms. Marshall leaned back, folding his arms, watching not just her, but every executive in the room. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked. I did, Raina replied softly. You just didn't see me. You saw my uniform. A silence fell that was thicker than blame. It was recognition. She continued. Last week, Leona tried to present me as a fluke, a Cinderella with a mop. But the truth is, I didn't rise in spite of this company. I rose because I studied it. Every deal, every meeting, every mistake. I didn't clean floors. I mapped the battlefield. Diane nodded slowly. And Mr. Liu? Raina straightened. He's waiting on our response. They've filed a formal ethics complaint to the U.S. Commerce Bureau, unless they receive evidence that Halston and Ride has taken appropriate corrective action. And what do they consider appropriate? Mr. Ward asked, frowning. Raina didn't blink. Transparency, leadership change, and someone at the negotiation table who understands more than market value. Marshall's gaze hardened. You? No, she replied. Me and everyone else who was kept out of this room because they didn't look the part. She handed out a folder to each board member. Recommendations, new hiring protocols, internal ethics training, an anonymous feedback system. But on the final page was a nameplate design. Raina Myles, Director of Global Cultural Strategy. A beat passed, then another. Diane picked up the folder, studying it. Well, she said softly. It's about time. Later that night, in the same office she used to polish with Windex, Raina stood behind the glass desk with her arms folded. The skyline was hers now, not to clean, to command. She picked up her phone. It was her mother. Ma, she said quietly, remember when you told me dignity don't pay rent? Her mother chuckled. I was wrong. Turns out it builds empires. Raina smiled. But as she looked out at the city, her mind wasn't at peace, because she knew something else. Leona was just one face of the problem, and this was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, the lobby of Halston and Ride looked different. Receptionists greeted interns by name. A poster near the elevators read, Merit doesn't have a dress code. On the 38th floor, a new department hummed with quiet intensity. Global Cultural Strategy. A room filled with voices once silenced, resumes once discarded, ideas once mocked. At the center of it all sat Raina Myles in a navy blue blazer, not out of protocol, but choice. Her desk was no longer stainless steel. It was tempered glass, sunlight pooling across contracts in Mandarin, Spanish, and Swahili. Raina, said Jennifer, her new assistant. The South African delegation just landed. Raina nodded, adjusting her blazer. Walk them in when they're ready. Her voice was calm, assured. But inside, she still remembered the woman who used to clean the room she now commanded. Not long ago, she had wiped windows while pretending not to hear the executive's laughter. Today, she was the decision-maker. A knock at the door. It was Marshall. He stepped in with slower steps than usual, humility softening his usually rigid posture. I saw the article, he said, nodding toward the framed magazine cover on her wall. The janitor, who redefined power. You made quite the Forbes list. Raina gave a small smile. And you let me. No, he replied. I saw what I should have seen 3 years ago. And I'm sorry it took the world falling apart to open my eyes. She studied him. For the first time, the apology didn't feel performative. It's not about me, she said gently. It's about the others you've never met. The ones who never even got the chance to prove they belonged in this building. He nodded slowly. We want you to lead our global ethics transition. The board's on board. Full authority. Your terms. Raina exhaled, quiet and steady. I'll do it. But on one condition. Name it. No more ignoring what doesn't fit the picture. From now on, we listen to every voice. Even the ones that come in quiet. Across the city, in a cramped apartment in Queens, Leona sat in front of a flickering screen. Bills were piled on the kitchen table. Her name was flagged in HR databases across the industry. She watched a YouTube clip. Raina at Howard University, standing at a podium, a sea of young faces watching her with awe. Too often, Raina said into the microphone, we are told to shrink, to clean, not speak, to serve, not lead. But what if we did more than survive? What if we rewrote the blueprint? The room erupted in applause. Leona turned off the screen. This time, the tears that welled in her eyes weren't from bitterness. They were from something unfamiliar. Regret. Weeks later, Raina stood before a new class of hires, most of whom had names that would have once been filtered out. She looked at them not as employees, but as proof. Proof that dignity doesn't always wear a suit, that intelligence doesn't always come from titles, that change doesn't arrive with noise, but with preparation, with patience, with eyes wide open. Here's what I need you to remember, she said, voice low but sure. The system wasn't built for us. But if we walk with purpose, with memory, we don't need to fit in. We remake the room. And that night, back in her apartment, now high above the city, Raina lit a single candle on her mother's kitchen table. She served the food with her own hands, despite the caterers downstairs. Her mother smiled through tired eyes. You always were meant to lead. No, Raina whispered, taking her mother's hand. I was meant to be seen. Outside the window, the skyline pulsed with light. Inside, the daughter who had once been invisible, now glowed. Because the world had taught her to clean footprints, but she'd learned how to leave them instead.